Greetings and hello, I am Kaiser Louis Philip V, coming to you today with another vlog after a extended period of inactivity. I apologize for the poor lighting. My fluorescent light bulb up here has gone out, and I just realized this when I woke up this morning, and it was working fine, and now it's not. So you just have to deal with me being a little shadowy, but I mean, who wants to see my face really that badly? So what I wanted to come talk about today specifically was the as the video says, as you might have gathered, I'm talking about, extremes. And what do I mean specifically by extremes? Well, as you may have seen in the Declaration of Continuation, I've noticed a lot of fascist undercurrents and things going on in the traditionalist subsects and movements. And this is really, really concerning to me for a variety of reasons. But what I want to specifically speak about today is, I've seen on a lot of pages I follow, or rather used to follow, whose content I used to share regularly, talking about these recent burnings of mosques in Sweden, and this is the third one in the last 2 weeks that was noteworthy. And in the first two, some people were actually hurt and or killed, even children, I understand. And to me, that's simply abhorrent. See. Now, if you don't understand why Sweden is suddenly burning mosques, I'll give you the lowdown. Sweden, for the last 2 or 3 years, has seen an influx of immigrants from the Middle East due to the war, they're showing up everywhere for the same reason. They're showing up in America and in Britain. The countries that they used to live in are not safe anymore, and so they're coming to these other countries to find asylum and to find find refuge, political, religious, or otherwise. The problem is this has brought with it a whole host of cultural clashes and unforeseen issues, particularly when some of these people coming are not necessarily better than the people they left behind in the Middle East. There have been stories of gang rape going on in the refugee camps for these Muslim immigrants in Sweden. They've been kidnapping aid workers and, holding them there against their will and doing horrible things to them, and the Swedish government is silent. There were riots in Stockholm, and it was ridiculous. They were going around burning cars, and the Swedish police were going around issuing parking tickets on the burned-out cars. The Swedish government was basically unwilling to do anything about it that would constitute what would seem like, to most people at least, a reasonable response to riots of this magnitude. I mean, there were points where it was so bad, some police forces in Sweden literally just abandoned their posts and let things die down, because to them there was no other way to stop this madness, because, Sweden is one of those countries where, they don't believe in a heavily armed police force. But, that's all fine and good, but what do you do when, how do you combat, with that kind of mindset, how do you combat, basically a horde of, Eastern barbarians, who are coming at you with meat cleavers and, planks and things, and who literally just don't give a shit, who are going to just try to kill you. And so it was a huge problem, and I didn't hear a lot out of it. I didn't hear a whole lot out of it. Most people haven't. I've heard the same stories get repeated over and over again, but I haven't heard anything really, that super substantial necessarily. So nothing that's changed really, other than things have died down. And recently, coinciding with the rise of, nationalist movements again, or nationalist sympathies again, in places like Germany and Norway and other places, and in Lithuania, Poland, we've seen this huge, we've seen a sudden outburst of domestic violence towards Muslims living in the country. Now, I, as an American, even though Americans like to talk about the Islamization of America, we don't know what that is. I mean, most places in America, you don't hear the muezzin call. Most places in America, you don't see a lot of Muslims. I personally have never seen the kind of stuff that you see in Europe in terms of Muslims. I've seen a woman in a hijab at a Walmart once where I live, but I don't have a lot of contact with Muslims where I live, okay? The region I live in, you just don't. So I can't really talk with any authority about, understanding what that's like. And of course, with the UK, they had this thing with these, pedophilia rings that were very closely linked to Muslim immigrant communities and things that were terrible. And the police would not do anything about it for fear of being politically incorrect. And they were calling these Middle Eastern people Asian. They weren't calling them Middle Eastern or even Arabic. They were saying Asian. Which, okay, maybe British people just refer to everybody from the continent of Asia, which would technically include the Middle East, as Asians, but I'm sorry, as an outsider looking in, that's a very weird way to describe people who are clearly Middle Easterners. And I understand completely why people who live in these areas may well, under these circumstances, feel they have to lash out in a knee-jerk reaction and become violent. But I have to stress, I can't really speak to people who are not Catholics and who are not bound by magisterial teaching, but I can speak to my own subset of followers, and I can speak to my own people on this matter, which don't let yourself get wrapped up in this. This is not the way we handle things, okay? It's just as barbaric as, Muslim outbursts of domestic violence against Christians. It's just as barbaric and just as unprovoked. Look, you want to do some good, you want to fight terrorists, join the military. Go as a private mercenary to Syria, to one of these groups or one of the Assyrian militias, which we've proved in the news they're taking foreign mercenaries now. They're taking anybody who shows up and isn't an idiot who wants to fight. We've seen them do that. So you want to go fight terrorists, go do that. The fact is, as I said before in a video about tolerance, the Muslim down the street who owns a gas station is not a terrorist just because he's affiliated with the same religion as terrorists. And if you think I'm being too modern about all this, case in point, Alfonso X of Castile. Alfonso X of Castile was an Iberian king of the Kingdom of Castile, one of the Christian kingdoms of northern Spain that was fighting the southern Ayyubids. And even while he was a staunch enemy of the Ayyubids and was recognized as something of a crusading warrior king among the Spanish, he still managed to allow for religious tolerance within his own domains, and he still allowed, Muslims who were manifestly loyal to the crown and manifestly loyal to, the kingdom and were not conspiring with the enemy to live peacefully and follow their faith privately in, the Kingdom of Castile. And up until the expulsion after the Reconquista, which came because of the fact that, the Muslim population in southern Iberia was understandably pining for the Ayyubids, and the Ayyubid Caliphate, even though confined to North Africa, was still very rich by way of the slave trade. So they weren't just going to go away, and it wasn't a far-fetched idea. In fact, there's proof it wasn't a far-fetched idea that, Muslims working within Spain could try and subvert the new government and the new agents of the crown in the areas where the Reconquista had finished, such as Granada and Cordoba. And so they instituted the expulsion. They sent all of the Moriscos, all the people who were ethnically Moriscos, as they called them, or who were Muslims, to North Africa. They basically kicked them out. They basically deported them. They kicked them out of the country and sent them to North Africa and confiscated most of their possessions and their land. If people might want to sneer at something like that, but it was honestly the most humane thing they could have done in the situation to resolve the problem, in my opinion. The Spanish people were not going to get along with the Muslims that were in southern Iberia. The Muslims were not going to get along with them. There was a genuine threat of insurgency in Spain, which is documented. So they weren't just going to, ignore that problem. But they also couldn't just go around being all secret police, executing Muslims in the streets left and right. That would give the Ayyubids pretext to go back to war with Spain. And the Spaniards at the time did not have ambitions of invading North Africa because they just wanted Iberia. They just wanted their homeland, which they had been struggling for nearly 500 years. Okay, that's all they wanted was their home. They wanted a free, independent Iberia, free of foreign Muslim occupation, and they got that. So really to, and again, before that, before this whole problem emerged, Muslims were allowed to live peacefully within these countries. Um, in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Muslims were prominent in certain regions of the Balkans, and barring any like flagrant acts of disloyalty, they were allowed to live in peace. The same thing in many Eastern European countries where Islam had naturally gained a foothold. There was a respect for the people who clearly were not interested in causing problems and just happened to be Muslim. Um, so it really is. It's not necessarily an issue that I'm some modernist pinky. It's just I understand that this is not how we do things. It's not how we've ever done things, and this formula for persecuting a whole subset of religious believers is many of whom may not be causing problems yet, is not a good idea. Because, the fact is, if you persecute a whole group of people whose religion already has a basis for domestic terrorism, then you're going to get more domestic terrorists. And the fact is, you can't sanely, effectively curb something like that. It's just too much time and too much money. Okay, if you want to take morals completely out of the equation, which you never should do, it's expensive, it's ineffective, it sets a terrible precedent for a police state, and it's a horrible, horrible, horrible idea. You could spend more money keeping terrorists out of the country and targeting actual terrorist cells than by simply going around kicking doors down and arresting people for being Muslim, which is inevitably what this outburst of domestic violence could lead to ultimately. These just violent acts of mob violence, and I understand the aggression, I understand the anger, but you're taking it out on the wrong people and you're wasting it on the wrong people, which doesn't help anything. I mean, to give you another good example of what I'm talking about, the real problem inherent in okay, there we go, I just remembered it. See, Catholic countries and monarchies took a whole bunch of their ideas from Roman government, from the Roman Empire. And in the Roman Empire, religious, as in Catholic monarchies that went on, religious diversity was something of a thing. But it wasn't pluralism. The religion supported by the state and adhered to by its leaders was the Catholic faith. That wasn't up for debate. And heretical sects are different than independent religions, and most pagan sects weren't around because everyone had converted to Catholicism, particularly starting with the royalty, or these pagan religions again were violent and cantankerous and just necessitated extermination. And it wasn't supposition either. They were actually raiding villages and killing people, and the only way to stop it was to, tear down the idols and, a la, Carthage, tear down their idols and, sow salt in their fields. But going back to the Roman example, the Roman pantheon, before it was a church as it is now, it was a temple to every god within the Roman Empire, within all the peoples of Rome. You could worship Mithra or any number of pagan deities from any part of the world. Mithra was very popular among Roman legionaries. You could worship any number of gods. But when it came down to it, you still had to pay tribute to the Roman gods. You still had to give a pinch of incense. And this is why Christians were persecuted in the beginning. Anybody could have refused to burn incense for the Roman gods and would have still gotten the axe just like the Christians did. It wasn't a particular hatred for Christianity and an all-embracing love for paganism. It was just a matter of that the Romans were, while not necessarily superstitious, still put a lot of faith in the traditions of the Roman state religion, which had roots to the Etruscan religion and also was partially stolen from the Greeks. So, it was only a matter for the Romans. Worshipping the Roman gods was a matter of state security. It wasn't this blind faith kind of thing. For them, the Roman gods were worshipped because in their mind they worked. They sacrificed to the Roman gods, they get victory in battle. So it was that kind of a thing. it wasn't this supernatural thing like it is with Catholicism. It was a totally different ballpark. Where the difference with Catholic states came into being was that in Catholicism, forced conversion was already a no-no. So there was no real effort to forcefully make people become Catholics. There were notable exceptions, particularly, in the Carolingian Empire for forced baptisms, and they weren't necessarily so much forced as it was, well, I guess coerced baptism, but these were extremely extraordinary circumstances. Charlemagne was engaged in fighting pagan tribes for whom their religion was a unifying factor. So how do you defeat these people and make it official that they are a part of your empire? Well, since for most pagans were in the areas where he was working, such as, Verdun and other places, paganism was more of a cultural facet, like it was with Rome. It wasn't really so much of a faith thing or a superstition thing as it was just like, it's funny to describe, pretty much. I guess it's really, I don't want to say superstition because that makes them sound stupid, and I don't want to say Romans were stupid or ancient peoples were stupid. It's more like, doing a rain dance when there's a bank of clouds nearby, and then claiming that you got rain because of a rain dance and not because of precipitation. It's more that kind of thing. It's just where you put the credit, I suppose. So trying to break down these pagan religions was a part of establishing peace and order in the empire, and it was because they had thrown the first stone. It wasn't because they just wanted to force everyone to be Catholic. In fact, later states, again, eschewed this model of forcing people to become Catholic completely, because it wasn't something the church required. It wasn't something they ever asked people to do. And it was, for forced conversion wasn't even a thing or coerced conversion wasn't even considered legitimate in Catholic theology from the beginning. So you couldn't really, have a model like that, like a confessional state where you have to be Catholic to be a part of the state. And there are notable examples in the trad community, or at least for the trad community, of very popular Catholic nations that did this. The Spanish Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All these states, let's see, what else? The Grand Duchy of Poland, or the or the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. All these various nations didn't require you to be Catholic to be a part of the part of the nation or to enjoy certain basic civil rights. Basically, here's how it worked. The state supported Catholicism and supported the Catholic Church officially. It didn't give support or credence to other religions. That's it. I mean, in times of war, it fluctuated based on circumstance. If there was, for instance, for Alfonso X, if there was a war on, and he's fighting these Muslim countries, or this Muslim country, but the Muslims in his own nation are kind of on the fence about the Ayyubids, then he works on trying to get them to like him by not being a douche to them, and not creating more enemies. He had enough problems getting Leon and Asturias and Aragon and to some extent Portugal to work with him. He didn't need to make problems in his own territory. The Grand Duchy of Poland, not Muslims, but Eastern Orthodox. Even though they fought the Eastern Orthodox an awful lot, there was no effort to directly persecute Eastern Orthodox believers. Basically what it was is the government gave clear, open support to one religion and just did it to the others. Of course there was conversion efforts, and of course there was, all this other stuff just, designed either for public order or for the, support of the church, but it wasn't just this state-mandated confessional state where, there is only one religion, because, medieval peoples and Catholics knew, not just by their own theology, but from the Roman model, that wasn't a way to run a country. That wasn't a way to run a nation, or an empire for that matter. It doesn't work because, you can still have Catholicism upheld by the state as the true religion, and defend it from attacks and defend it from people who are blaspheming it without being oppressive towards them. And you're probably thinking this all sounds terribly complicated. Well, why can't we just, axe the Muslims and axe the pagans and be done with it? I say to you, well, This goes back to what I've said before. Legitimacy worked because the vast majority of people believed that it did work. They believed in legitimacy. But the vast majority of people today don't, so there aren't any monarchies. So there aren't many monarchies today because people don't want that. The fact is, counter-revolution is only going to succeed if the vast majority of people are at least semi-open to the idea. You know, of course, we have to consolidate ourselves because we're very disparate. We have to consolidate ourselves and form our own, you know, groups and things. But, you know, to make our lives at least a little bit easier, we shouldn't make enemies where we don't have to make them. I'm not saying we give clemency to terrorists. I'm just saying that people who happen to be of the same religion but clearly aren't terrorists shouldn't be treated like they are, because then you may end up making terrorists. And does that make sense? Do you see the point I'm making? It's just easier to, you know, follow the traditional example instead of following these models of newer states, you know, like the Ustaša, the independent state of Croatia, and all these people who did forced conversions and the like and all that, or, you know, Franco of Spain, you know, who didn't even outlive their founders. You know, they didn't even outlive their first heads of state, you know. So do you want to follow their example, or do you want to follow the example of monarchies that lasted for thousands of years, ruled by people who were, you know, conquering nations and leading kingdoms in great times of strife, when these upstarts and their families were shoveling shit somewhere? Just think about that. And, you know, again, you know, if you see it going on, if you see people being, you know, just outright dicks to, you know, or being, you know, just, you know, prejudiced or whatever, you know, raise your voice. You know, raising your voice for these people doesn't mean you're okay with Islam. It just means you're okay with the principle of not being a dick to someone just based on their religion.